All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. I'm James Hedrick. I'm a member of the Montgomery County Planning Board, and on behalf of myself and all the rest of our Planning Board members, we want to thank you here today, or welcome you here today for the final installment in our speaker series. Also like to thank the National Center for Smart Growth at the University of Maryland for co-sponsoring this series with the Planning Board. Really appreciate that from them. So we want to start out, this year's series has been all about housing, and tonight's installment will be no different. For each panel discussion, we brought together local and national experts to explore the trends, strategies, and innovations about housing availability and supply and affordability across the country. So it's a huge topic in our community, it's a huge topic in Montgomery County, it's a huge topic across the nation. So we want to address the skyrocketing real estate prices and the limited housing stock and supply that we have in our county. So the challenges we're facing in Montgomery County, as I said, mirror the experiences of cities and counties nationwide. So to work on these challenges, land use experts across the country are exploring new and innovative, and as we were discussing in the back beforehand, not so innovative solutions we used to do a couple decades ago, maybe a century ago. So we're talking about trying to do more housing choices, different types of housing choices that fit people's needs at different parts of their life and in different areas. So today we'll hear from a few experts and developers with experiences post-relaxed zoning areas and with missing middle housing. So first we're going to hear from Rosie Hepner. All right. She's Vice President of the ULI Terwilliger Center for Housing. She's going to frame the conversation with some information and some data that she's got on housing productions and trends and sharing some examples of what happens when there's not enough housing variety. All right, we'll also hear from Jack Wilburn. All right, he's founding principal of BWD Architects. All right, from zoning changes to project approval to HVAC and fire department access, which I want to hear about the HVAC stuff. He's going to address the challenges and opportunities of tackling missing middle housing from that angle. And then finally from Tony Perez, Senior Associate at Opticos Design, a name I'm sure none of you have ever heard of before and do not recognize. If you're listening to this, you know who they are. So Tony will drive into the details of some of the things that we consider to ensure, or that they consider to ensure neighborhood fit for the continued success of missing middle housing and advancement of different future projects. So he's going to talk about that. And before we begin, I do want to say that while there are things in common about housing markets across the country and across nationwide, each jurisdiction is unique. Montgomery County is unique. DC is unique. All right, from the history to the politics to the current structure of its zoning code. So all of those elements are going to inform the success of what we're going to put forward with what we're doing with attainable housing and all the changes that we're making in Montgomery County. So in short, what worked in one place may not work here. What worked in some places may not work in other places. We're going to try different things. Some things may be effective, some not. We'll see how it goes. So we're honored to have the three speakers here with us this evening to learn from their expertise and pull out all the lessons learned and apply them here to Montgomery County. So at the end of the presentations, we'll have an open Q&A session, so stick around for that. I want to hear your thoughts. And now, our first speaker for the night, Rosie Hepner. I will give you a more full introduction now. And so if I miss anything on your bio, please let me know. So in her current role, Rosie oversees the Terwilliger Center's wide-ranging activities, including technical assistance engagements, housing awards programs, and an annual housing conference. Before joining ULI in 2017, she worked for two international development nonprofits, most recently the International Capital Market Specialist at Habitat for Humanity International. Earned a bachelor's degree from George Washington University and a master's degree in city and regional planning from the Catholic University of America's School of Architecture and Planning, where her research focused on low-income housing practices and design. We need to talk more about that offline after this because I'm really interested. But welcome, Rosie, and please we'll give the floor over to you.
Okay, so yes, I'm Rosie Hepner. I'm with ULI's Terwilliger Center for Housing. ULI is a member-based nonprofit. Our member base is pretty much made up of developers, architects, policymakers, attorneys, financiers, everyone involved in the real estate space. And within ULI, I focus on housing. And so our center has a lot of different activities, ranging from working with local communities on their specific housing challenges to presenting awards for best practices in policy and developments. And we also have events and convenings and research. And one of those pieces of research two of those pieces of research I will be speaking to tonight, including our Home Attainability Index, which is a data-rich resource to understand local markets and how they're performing in terms of providing enough housing for the community. and our latest policy research. So as I said, the Home Attainability Index covers about, I want to say 112 metropolitan statistical areas. And within that, we cover about 30 different metrics related to housing. And so it's a really neat resource for understanding exactly what is being built, what's not being built, is it reaching the right income targets, and also maybe comparing to peer cities or competitor cities. And so within that index, this was released in February. We had 5 national takeaways, none of which are probably surprising. Housing production rates are not where they need to be. Our most expensive markets are on the West Coast and the Northeast, your high-cost coastal markets. Because of wages being stagnant and housing costs rising, your workforce is really suffering here. Racial inequality is present in basically every single market in our index. And because we are not building housing near jobs, we have a lot of sprawl and people commuting further and further away, which has created many markets with a ton of super commuters. So those were the 5 major takeaways. But looking at this region specifically, and I pulled in some other nearby regions, peer cities, and the like. So, the Washington region is not building enough housing. So that red line is where we should be, building 1 new unit for a new household for a healthy housing market. And the DC region is not doing that. None of them are, but DC is really falling behind. And so what happens is housing costs go up. And before really speaking to that, it's important to frame this and really provide context on who exactly we're talking about. Jobs have changed over the decades. Salaries have not maybe changed with them. Housing costs have certainly gone up. And so I always think that this slide is a little shocking for some people to see exactly who we're talking about when we talk about who needs affordable housing. These are not only jobs that are very important to a community. You can't really survive without them and sustain without them. They're the ones we called essential workers during the pandemic. And you want them to live in your community. You don't want a firefighter to commute from hours away. You don't want your teachers not to be able to be invested in the community that they're serving. You need EMTs. All these are very important and critical members of our workforce. And they're also people that used to be able to afford a middle-class lifestyle, and now they are really struggling to afford the cost of market rate rent and sometimes even affordable rents. And so, particularly during the pandemic when people had maybe gaps in their paycheck and lost their jobs, you see people who are then maybe a paycheck away from eviction and homelessness. So this is who we're talking about when we say things like 80% AMI or 120% AMI, which are impersonal ways of talking about really important people. And so when we talk about percentage of homes affordable to buy to 80% AMI, which were your EMTs, your child care workers, the DC region does not have enough homes affordable to buy at that income. I think the data set median is, I want to say like 50% or so. So it's not great anywhere, but it's particularly bad here. And I also want to provide a little nuance here. This is just the percentage of homes affordable to buy at that area median income. It doesn't mean that they're actually available and on the market. So the situation's worse. Even more when you look at more of your middle income, higher income of those workforce jobs, we're not building enough and homes that are affordable to buy for them. And again, doesn't mean that they're actually available if they are affordable. And then this one's always very shocking. This is years, not months, not weeks, years to save for a down payment, which basically means people can't buy homes. If it takes 38 years in the DC region to save enough, and that means that's not considering maybe a pandemic that disrupts your paycheck or anything like that. That's a long time. And so you might have people who would be well positioned to become homeowners and then vacate rental homes for people with lower incomes, but they can't because it takes 4 decades to save for a house. So then you move into the rental data set, and here we are looking again at a percentage of affordable rents at that 80% area median income, and we do not have enough. Same thing for the month savings for rent. This is like the year saving for down payment. This stifles movement in the market. So you have people staying in apartments that might not be suitable for their needs anymore. Maybe they're growing their families and they want to move from a 2-bedroom to a 3-bedroom. There might not be any 3 bedrooms on the market. They might not be able to move because it takes basically 4 years to save to move. So this is a big constriction in like a healthy flow of a housing market. So then looking down the county level, because that was for this entire region, which can be misleading sometimes. Again, these are probably not surprising. The cost to rent a 2-bedroom just in the last 2 years has gone up quite a bit. It's growing, it's spreading. So that's just 2 years. So, the longer it takes to address this, the worse the situation's going to be. Home values going up too, which means that the percentage of middle-class families or households that are cost burden are also increasing. And that means that they're spending more than 30% of their income towards housing. And we don't want to see people spending more than 30% of their income on housing, because then they're not spending money on other, necessities in life, whether it's medication, healthy food, books for their kids' schools, etc., or just contributing to the economy in other ways. This is the same graphic, but for lower middle income, so folks that are earning $35,000 to $50,000 a year. And again, it's just worsening. Probably none of this is shocking, but just kind of calling it out. And so while areas like DC, the DC region, San Francisco, LA, New York, this has been festering for a while, I think, the pandemic allowed us to see kind of, for a few communities, what happens more rapidly, and shows us, what's in store for us if we let this continue. And so I like to go to, again, reminding you who we're talking about, because this is not, it's important to have the human element here, and also to remember that, housing is part of the economy. We like to say housing is where jobs go at night. There's also a more personal way of putting it, but it's important that if we don't have those jobs, if we don't have the homes for people who work these jobs, it becomes a real problem for the economy. And we've seen this in resort communities. So even pre-pandemic, we were seeing this in Nantucket, Vail, Aspen, Park City. We were getting calls from communities. We were seeing policies put forth by these communities because Vail, I don't have to tell you, Nantucket, Vail, Aspen, these are all very expensive places. They're very attractive places, but they also rely on a workforce that does not earn the kind of income that affords you a place in Aspen or Park City, you name it. You have people who work at hotels, waitresses and waiters, bartenders, ski lift operators, ski lift instructors. These are not folks who are able to buy a home in Aspen or Vail or wherever. Worse is that they're, in the case of Nantucket, a literal island, but even in some of these rural communities, they're far away. You then have these long commutes. I still don't know. I've brought this up many times. I don't know what happens if you're a bartender at 3 o'clock in the morning when you finish your shift in Nantucket and you're on a literal island with no home. I don't know that the ferry goes that late. Vail and Aspen. So Aspen, we received an awards application because Aspen Ski Company started building housing for their workforce because they couldn't retain their workforce because people had to travel 2 hours to get to the mountain. If it's a snowy morning and these are dangerous roads, it's a problem for retaining workforce, but it's also just a little inhumane, if you will. But so we were seeing this even pre-pandemic. And the entire situation escalated during the pandemic because you had a lot of higher paying jobs that were able to work remotely, moving to these very attractive places to live, lake communities, ski resorts, etc. My center at ULI contributed to 2 local technical assistance engagements with Steamboat Springs and Rabun County. Rabun County is a lake resort in Georgia. Both of them found themselves in a situation where, you have suddenly, I mean, Steamboat Springs, you'll see in the upper right-hand corner, the median household price is $691,000. Your ski instructors are not buying that house. And it became a problem for their economy. They don't have, right now they're having a problem retaining doctors. This has exceeded, the people who think it affects. And when you have rural communities that we're not building that much housing, they're not building skyscrapers, it really has affected them quite quickly. Rabin County, you had all these people living there now year-round, but couldn't go to their favorite coffee shop because it used to be seasonal, and now they expect it to be year-round, but the barista can't afford to live there. And so this has had a major kind of economic catastrophe in some of these communities, and we've worked with them. I had a phone call with the Steamboat folks the other week. It's not going well because of NIMBYism, and they were even gifted a 500-acre parcel of land. So when you take that land cost out, which is already or should be a leg up, but it's not moving forward because the city won't annex the parcel land in because they're worried about other costs, but they really can't afford to not do this. Rabin County's having more success, redeveloping a motel and adding other affordable housing, but this is a real, having a major impact on their economy, besides from just the fact that, people who are supporting these communities can't live in them. So, that's kind of what happens pretty rapidly, but, it's what's in store for us if we don't address it. So it's best to be proactive. So a couple of industry findings and best practices that I would just like to point out. Missing middle it's not one size fits all. It can look very different. The upper left-hand corner is in Boston. It's more of a high rise, if you will, but the intention of this building was it was a partnership with a local hospital and a tenants association to have a mixed tenure building so that whether you're a surgeon at the hospital or janitor at the hospital, you could afford to live there. There were options for everyone within those two. The next photo is from Aspen Ski Company. Those were their trailers. They're hyper efficient, really cool tiny homes for their ski staff. The next one is just townhomes in downtown Boise. We have cottages in Georgia, and we have, a mid-rise in Seattle. All these have been financed with different ways, either land donations or just tax abatements. You have some policies that offer carrots or sticks, and then the power of partnerships is very important. So a few more examples. These are from our awards that really focus on that 60 to 120% area median income, your missing middle demographic, if you will. This is in Brooklyn, New York. This might not work in Montgomery County. We're talking about Brooklyn, New York, much higher density, but this is achieving apartments for your middle income households. Broadway Lofts is in Michigan, much lower density, a brownfield redevelopment, but again, focused on that middle income cohort of individuals. Here we have townhomes in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And then one here, the Laureate. And it's great, it's beautiful. And so those are just some of the many ways missing middle housing can look and how it can, achieve housing for that demographic. So the other piece of research we've recently released is our Shaw Forum report. So we convened a multidisciplinary group of developers, policymakers, academics, researchers to talk about what's actually working and different policy solutions to drive up the production of housing. So this is not just missing middle housing, this is kind of all types of housing, but a lot of the findings are not, it's not even necessarily super innovative. It's things that we used to allow decades and decades ago that we've gotten away from. And so the three main categories, I guess, of how we categorized our policies were whether they are reforming, connecting, or leveraging. So the first set of policies under reform, and you two will speak a little bit more about this, are updating zoning codes and other codes that are prohibitively just restricting what you can build, how you build it, how big it becomes, and then obviously drives up the cost of housing. Boise is an excellent example. The Terwilliger Center also worked with the city of Boise, and they did a zoning code rewrite to just ease some of those restrictions that were unnecessarily single-family zoning. Infill, ADU policies across the country are taking off because it's an easy way to just add gentle density in communities that maybe you're not going to build what we saw in Brooklyn a couple slides ago. Regulatory changes. I like the Texas example. There's just a lot of costs associated with the entire process, entitlement processes, and even lawsuits when the community opposes it. These all end up hurting the ability to provide housing at more affordable price points, and so allowing developments that are adding more affordable or middle income housing to expedite certain parts of those processes is extremely helpful for cutting costs. Pairing housing and transit. The DC region, including Montgomery County, is doing an excellent job of this, and just really making use of metro stations and other high opportunity zones to build your housing, and making best use of that. I love the things that are, all the policies that are reducing parking requirements. We have outdated rules about how much parking is needed at apartment buildings. I'm a one-car household. I have 2 kids. We are never in the car. We are a biking family, and we don't have off-street parking, and it's fine. I don't know where my car is right now. We haven't seen it in a couple weeks. Like, it's fine. And so there are a lot of families like ours, or take the bus or metro, and so it's just sometimes requires a refresh and modernization of rules like parking requirements or parking minimums. Not all of these are maybe relevant right now, so I'll just skip through these. And then leveraging land, I think one of the things the Terwilliger Center has seen heard a lot of, it's exciting, we'll cover it at our housing conference we did last year too, is making use of houses of worship. There are a lot of houses of worship or have declining memberships, and there's a lot of land. I think one of our board members said New York City, I think 30% of land in New York City is owned by houses of worship, and that's just a ton of potential land. We had an award winner in Arlington last year that made use of a veterans outpost. It allowed them to modernize that community amenity for the veterans, but also add housing. DC has done stuff with libraries and fire stations. So there's a lot of public land or vacant parcels. The Chicago example is a great one. Philadelphia does this too in terms of really making use of vacant land for smaller infill development. Money matters. There are lots of different ways you can finance this. The Brooklyn development used, New York City's got a lot of different policies to really get at different income targets in each building, and there's all sorts of other options you can explore. And then the topic du jour, office to residential. We've got a lot of vacant office space that it's very difficult to convert to residential. I think people were more excited than it actually will. It's a lot more difficult, and again, needs housing code changes and things like that to really make happen. But there are opportunities there, and we're seeing conversions happen. So those are just some of the things from the Terwilliger Center we've seen, and I think that was it for me. Yeah. So.
All right. Yeah, thank you, Rosie. That was wonderful. I do want to come back when we get to the question and answer session about, I think you mentioned focusing on the human element is important. We do a lot of work we talk about AMI and land use and things like that. That's people. That's what we're putting in homes. That's kind of the focus of it. And we could talk to also, I think, a little bit about the faith CTA for Montgomery County doing with houses of worship. All right, so next is Jack Wilburn. I'll give a little bit of background here on Jack. Founding principal, BWD Architects, Inc., founded in 1989. It's a Falls Church-based architectural and planning firm with diverse projects focused on collaborative design processes. He is a ULI member, a licensed architect in 12 states. I want to run down of which 12 states when we're done with this. I'm curious. And also 1982 graduate of Cal Poly at San Luis Obispo. Is a past president of McLean Planning Committee, served as chairman of the McLean Revitalization Corporation, and is currently the board chair of the First Stage, Fairfax County's first professional theater company. which we really should talk about, but is also not really all that relevant to the moment, unfortunately. His development experience started 25 years ago as an architect and co-developer of Blueberry Hill Consulting, and is a precursor to the cottage community of cottage community of the Railroad Cottages in Falls Church. Welcome, Jack. Please tell us what you got to tell us.
I get to be the most schizophrenic speaker, I think. I have sat on the opposite side of the counter and been on plan review processes as a planning committee chair. I'm an architect and planner, and I'm a developer. So I have all sorts of, something for everybody, accommodate tonight. I'm speaking specifically here as a planner and developer for a specific project that happened in Falls Church, Virginia. This was 6-7 years ago. It subsequently won the ULI Trends Award locally, and has been a source of great joy for us who developed it and for all the people who live there. That's the first meta message. It was a great project. We're very proud and happy to do it, and everybody involved with it and everybody who lives there and all the neighbors, surprisingly enough, are very happy. So the inspiration for this was really threefold. There were three partners who came together for this project. One was Teresa Twyford, a local realtor from the Midwest, who just was fascinated because she had grown up in a small town that had these little cottage communities. And then she discovered Ross Chapin's book about pocket neighborhoods. She had found out about me because I had designed the co-housing project where I live in Northern Virginia and helped develop it. And then we have a third partner, Bob Young, who was originally scheduled to be here, who has been a developer for 45 years. And as he likes to say, his children turned him into a raging liberal. He's a developer, he's not that liberal actually. But he was very involved in a lot of projects in Falls Church, one of which was a workforce housing project where he took voluntarily about 25% of the units in his apartment building and turned it into workforce housing. He was involved with the Education Foundation, to Rosie's point. These were the real people who were teaching our children and couldn't afford to live in Falls Church. So the three of us came together with this. And I brought also a pretty sincere interest in senior co-housing, which is how to age in community, not just age in place. Age in place is a formula for not living very well or very long. Aging in community is better for you. Strong community and social connections is better for you than stopping your 15 smoking cigarettes a day habit. So, and what we found was a like-minded soul in the planning department. Jim Snyder, who was the planning director at Falls Church, actually owns a cottage in a cottage community down in Charlottesville and had grown up in California, much as I had, and had seen housing that we were trying to do. This was nothing new. It was new to Falls Church. And so in this case, to get it through the original approval process, they sort of glommed all sorts of things onto it so it would be palatable to pass. One of the biggest ones is this became an age-restricted project, partly because not just parking or traffic or any of the other issues, school seats is a hidden issue for a lot of communities because it's a large cost and people are worried about swamping school systems. So this was one of the pieces for which they glommed onto this project. I will tell you, we probably could have sold this project 2 or 3 times over if it hadn't been age restricted. It became that popular. It's right on the WNOD. So the ordinance has a whole series of technical restrictions, some of which I know Tony's going to talk about. The opportunity was that it allowed us to do things for the community that a normal subdivision of 4 houses wouldn't have done. On the other hand, we had to pay for it, which made life a lot more interesting. So this parcel is a really odd triangular parcel, which is very hard to develop for anybody. It's at the end of a 12-foot wide access drive that services 3 or 4 other lots and comes from the county of Fairfax onto the WNOD property and then into Falls Church. So anything with this property involved 3 and actually 4 because the WNOD had to look back to make sure that their federal charter for being a historic district as a WNOD was not in conflict with allowing us to put a driveway in and widen it so the fire marshal could get in. So this was a very unusual parcel. Now, the history of this parcel is it was one of the last remnants of parcels in the Falls Church city that was traditionally an African-American homestead. It was bought by a woman in post-World War, earlier than that, Civil War. The rest of the parcels that were in Falls Church in the late 1800s were excised from the city and given back to the county. This was the original NIMBY, as far as I can see. They basically said, we don't want this in our backyard, and they took a part of the city and they gave it back to the county. So it's an interesting land parcel. This parcel actually was in the family all the way up through to when Frank, who used to sit out on the WNOD and shadow box, and I stopped talking to him for years. Finally, we bought the parcel from the 20 different heirs in the family. So it was not only complex physically, it was complex jurisdictionally, and it was complex to purchase because we had to buy it from a whole slew of people. So we came up with a site plan. We took the ordinance, which had been sort of truth tested. We were working with the ordinance writers to say, if you really want our take on it, here's what we could do or not do. And as you can see, it's got parking on one side, a row of homes, a common house, et cetera. And this is my co-housing background. One of the things that I was fascinated by and that aging community really wants is that you don't want to isolate people in their homes. You want a way to bring people together. So common amenities were very important. This project was built and then almost immediately went into COVID, and their experience of COVID was very different than anybody in the neighborhood. They were able to shelter in place, sit outside with a fire pit, and get to know each other and actually maintain their sanity and their community. So it has PV arrays, it has a common house, it has a WNOD trail, it has all these great amenities. And we thought, this is awesome. We came up with a house plan. Main level, 100% accessible in terms of universal design with a story and a half design to keep under the 25-foot limit. So it's 1,000 square feet on the main floor, no more than 500 on the upper floor. And we said, we're gonna make it pretty, we're gonna make these little cottagey things, just like Rosie's picture in the upper right up in Georgia, really cottagey looking. And we were thrilled. Submitted into the county, the neighborhood showed up. The neighborhood showed up. All right? Now, we were the first entity coming forward on this new ordinance. So the politicians who, in my better life, I will say, they have competing interests and a lot of constituent groups, and they're doing their best to be transparent, et cetera. On the other hand, there's a tendency to, well, I'm gonna solve this solution and dispute by cutting the baby in half. This is not where you should cut the baby in half. So in their infinite wisdom, they had us report and go through every single agency and commission anywhere in the city, even if it was about nothing. I forget the most ridiculous one, but we had continuous asks, and it gave more and more time for our NIMBY neighbors to come out and oppose us at every turn of the path. So we came up with sort of the basic community and planning issues and the benefits of doing this project. Number one, we spoke about the middle housing and how this actually filled a need. It's not affordable housing, it's housing that fills a need. You have people in Falls Church with these big old houses, they can't age in place, they can't repair it. This allowed them to stay in their neighborhood, still go to the stores that they have been going to for 20 years, and go to the community center and go to the farmer's market. And the ordinance was written for that. Children rentals, age restrictions, we were assuaging people worried about that this was going to swamp schools or that it was going to be rental, which of course is horrible, apparently. Then we also talked about traffic. Phenomenally enough, this lot could have fit 4 parcels. When we went through it, we actually said, given the ITE, which is the International Traffic Engineers Analysis, we were 2 cars more per day. Because, 12-foot wide drive aisle coming into houses, that was a pretty realistic issue. Parking, we said we meet the ordinance, and we have a lot of single car households. We have the W&OD in front of this parcel, so you can literally bike into town. It's about 5 minutes. Public safety, fire, emergency. We were solving an issue not just for all of these parcels, but the neighboring 3 or 4 parcels that were also served by this substandard drive. We were able to solve a problem for others. So this is our Fun with Fire Marshal picture, which I'm almost on time. So we had to prove to both the Fairfax County Fire Department, the Arlington County Fire Department, and the Falls Church Fire Department that we could get emergency vehicles down there, and we ended up having to sprinkle all the units. So all the units are domestically sprinklered, which is not a surprise in Maryland because that's a big part of a lot of Maryland jurisdictions are doing that. It's new in Virginia because Virginia. So we were able to solve that. Density. We walked through, and it was really interesting. Density versus intensity is always a question, but this is 4 by right within the current ordinance, 35-foot tall McMansions, maximum footprint, as much asphalt as possible. I'm not required to plant a tree or do any stormwater, et cetera. And we compared it to the same volume for the 10 cottages and the common house, and we were the same or less in terms of volume. All right? And then we were also able to, we'll show it later, but plant the bejesus out of it, which would never have happened if we weren't doing it under this ordinance. Stormwater. This site is dead flat. Not only is it triangular, but it's dead flat and doesn't drain anywhere. So we had all sorts of issues. So there's not a single piece of asphalt on this property. It's all xeriscape, and it's all permeable pavers everywhere in the project. And this is the buffer planting that we were able to create and still get a fire truck in. Sound and light pollution, we're all geothermal heat pumps, so you don't have big whirring HVAC units all over the place. LED lighting, dark sky compliant. This could be regulated, whereas for by right McMansions, we're going to be, I could put Klieg lights on the side of my house on motion sensors, and every deer as it walks through is going to boom down into your house, neighbor. So we told them we would be quieter, less intrusive than by right, and certainly safer than what's there right now. And then we went through, and Falls Church is very much an advocate for green infill, and we were able to do, essentially, we used a variation on a lead. We used Earthcraft. And we also wanted to make it sustainable for people moving in who no longer wanted to make it have a maintenance nightmare. So low maintenance exteriors. And this is a result. Now this is before all the plants went in the beginning, but you can see there's actually a boardwalk. Because it was so low, we couldn't get adequate lift for the first floor so that it wouldn't get damp and wet. So we actually built a boardwalk, so all these units are 0 step, from the parking lot all the way into the front door, into the bathroom and the bedroom. Here's a typical cottage. Looks just like the plans I drew. It's awesome. And then a lot of discussion about whether or not people would have privacy. I like how much our future neighbors who are opposing us and doing everything possible to block the project were so concerned about people not having enough privacy in these homes. And we explained that we were doing handed units, so that just like beach housing in any beach community you've ever been in your life, there's one side that has very few windows and one that has more windows and has sort of an L shape, so you can have private outdoor space. So we were able to accomplish that. This is actually inside the common house. This is not rinky-dink housing. It's really quite nice. And the result, I think, is pretty exceptional. So this is sort of my summary. This is the missing middle. This is definitely aging a community. That's very important to me personally. I'm in fact about to try to develop another senior co-housing community in Fairfax. And what's interesting to me is it's the parable of the giant hairball and the only 3 good idea rule. So as a developer of not touchy-feely wonderful housing, I've been involved with projects all up and down the Eastern Seaboard developing self-storage facilities, which is probably one of the most, people hate them. And so people would come up with, to me, I'm working for developers for 30 plus years. I said, there's three good ideas. No project can have more than 3 good ideas, because the more good ideas you put in, it starts to escalate the complexity and the possible errors and unintended consequences. So that explains most jurisdictions' rules. Those rules, they didn't just have 3 good ideas. They've had 4 a year for the past 40 years. And so you've created this giant hairball that is pretty indelibly built into processes. So what I often tell people is, and I'm trying to remember the quote from an Atlantic article I read recently that said, governments are handicapped in ways that are trying to achieve this goal, but they have a mandate for trying to achieve 30 other goals. And you're letting perfect be the enemy of good. And I think that's one of the discussions that as a community, you really have to look at and say, what are the goals we're having? How many other good ideas can I pull it together? Because the more you start to laminate good ideas, the more complex it is. The burden that we had to sustain as a development team is phenomenal when you have to go to every single possible commission and you're working in a very uncertain environment. That is the death knell for a developer. They're already taking a huge risk by tying up a piece of ground and putting their wherewithal into this. They're also trying to look in the magic crystal ball and look forward 2 or 3 years in advance. They have this huge market risk. There could be COVID. There could be interest rates go from 3% to whatever they are today, 7. And now when you add the burden of, well, I'm going to cover myself by requiring huge amounts of public say, and it increases uncertainty, it increases the time, that's probably, I don't think it's quite as much as getting the land for free for the one project, but it's close. Reducing the uncertainty, make the rules as tight and carefully constructed as possible, but try to reduce the amount of hoops that they have to go through that are moving. Make the hoops that big, but don't move them, okay? I will say, after all those yellow signs and after all the NIMBYs, it felt very good to all 3 partners. We didn't make a hill of money on this at all, but we didn't lose any money, for which we were very happy. The people who live there are just thrilled to live there. Bob's sister-in-law through his son lives there, so we get to hear like their meeting minutes and this, that, and the other, and how happy they are living there. And all the neighbors, one of the first things they did when they all moved in is they invited all the neighbors around them to come over for coffee and meet the neighbors. And since then, all those neighbors are just wax poetic about it. So it was unbelievably hard to do it. We had very sincere interest in doing the right thing, thank God, because we probably would have pulled the plug and just built 4 houses. And we are hugely happy that the result was happy for both the people who live there and all our neighbors. So, cottage communities aren't new. They've been around a long time. And it really is fabulous. So if you have a chance, go see it.
All right. Thank you, Jack. I appreciate that. You for coming and for pinch hitting for Bob and hitting it out of the park. I really appreciate you coming in tonight. I think that's I think looking at railroad cottages and that kind of a development is important for realizing how you can have general density and increase both the community that people feel and also get the houses that we need for that. So I think it's important to see projects like that, and I really appreciate it. And now last but absolutely not least, please join me in welcoming Tony Perez, 34 years of experience, including 12 as a public sector planner. Sorry about that. He spent his career helping communities improve their zoning codes with a focus on writing form-based zoning codes, which I think is really important and something we're going to be talking about quite a bit in the next couple of years here in Montgomery County. He's an expert in translating policy into clear and implementable development standards, and works to enable communities' vision by identifying and addressing barriers and writing responsive standards, and I think that's something we're trying to do right now and we'll be doing very soon. So a leader in advancing implementation of missing middle housing and form-based codes, please welcome Tony.
Thank you. I'm certainly not as funny as Jack, so yeah, thanks for your patience. Thanks for having us here. Really happy to be participating in this and providing information and resources for you as you consider middle housing going forward. So just to put a fine point on it, you know, the term middle housing gets used a lot. There's middle income housing, there's middle income, there's middle housing. Mm-hmm. And so what I'm going to be focusing on tonight, and those are all true and useful. What I'm going to be focusing on tonight is actually what you call small-scale attainable housing, which we at Opticos call missing middle housing. So that just some terminology. And the three pictures right there on this front slide, you can see they're all this scale. And if you look closely, like the one on the left, it might look like a single-family house, right? It's actually a fiveplex. The one in the middle is a side-by-side duplex, and the picture on the right is a project that's being built that's actually something along the lines of what Jack described. It's a pocket neighborhood with these detached buildings. And I just really want to point that out very quickly here at the beginning, that if you're watching this here or online and you say, wow, that one on the right, I've seen those. They put a park or some open space and then they put big apartment buildings around it. No. Look closer. Those are detached houses or detached duplexes, cottages in some cases that are going around that garden. Very, very big difference. So I'm going to talk about 7 things. Maybe we won't get to the 7th because of time, but here are the topics that I'm going to talk about. And I'm approaching them from the perspective of just having a lot of experience writing these standards for cities for the past 25 years and seeing what gets written by a lot of people across the country. You know, at Opticos, we do a lot of research on what people are doing. We can learn from it many times, and other times we can learn from not doing it. And so what I'm going to show you tonight are sort of the pet peeves or things to avoid or watch out for as you prepare your standards, as you go through a process and say, wow, what number should it be, or should we consider another approach? So first of all, what is this? One of the biggest things that we see going awry in missing middle practice is the policy gets written, and it sounds good, and the pictures are good, and the comp plan says the right things, but then when it gets to the standards, there's nothing in the comp plan policy or in the standards that actually differentiates between these two results. They're both multifamily as far as the city is concerned, as far as all the stakeholders are concerned, but missing middle housing, small-scale attainable housing, is the thing on the left. And the way we differentiate this is, and I learned this from an architect, Paul Mortensen, and I worked for a long time ago, Stefanos Paulzoidis. He told me one day, we were driving in the car, and he said, and this guy's brilliant, he's a genius. Driving in the car one day, and he says, Tony, you know, I've thought about it a lot, I've analyzed buildings a lot. There are 2 categories, house scale and block scale. That's essentially the way he said it. He said they're house scale and block scale, these 2 categories of buildings. And you know, Stefanos says a lot of things, and most of them are right on, and others require a little more thinking. Okay, I'm with you. This one I thought, I got to think about this. Really, 2 scales? And so a couple years later, I said, you know what? You're right. There are buildings that are the size of houses, and buildings that are not the size of houses is the easier way to say it. And so block scale buildings are like that building right over there that says Elite Dental. That is a block scale building because it's as big as the block, or buildings that are arranged together to form most or all of a block. That's an easy way to understand it. So by process of elimination, when you look at the house scale building on the left, what is the apartment building on the right that's 3 stories and about 150 feet long? It's not house scale, right? So it's in the category of block scale, even though that's a big category. Knowing that is huge. And a lot of cities' missing middle standards fail to make this distinction. They call it missing middle and they say all these right things, but they don't have any dimensional requirements that make the thing on the left happen as opposed to make the thing on the right. So if you're an opponent and you want to do something really useful, make sure the thing on the right doesn't happen when people say they're going to do small scale attainable housing. So a couple other ways to look at this. House scale, which is the category of small scale attainable, is always 2 stories. You saw Jack's project, it was 1 story or what we call 1.5. Sometimes it has a partial 2nd story or an occupied attic space. And so you see that happens on the right? You see that duplex? It's a two-story building. You see the arrow on the left that's showing you 2 stories up to that eave. Now look at the one on the left. And I want to clarify, it says allowed by the zoning. It's not your zoning. This is in another part of the country that will remain nameless. But that is a 3-story duplex. And so this building met the duplex rules and was allowed. But look at the context. It's 1- and 2-story buildings. And so we're back to that question. Is it house scale? And the answer for the one on the left is no. Is it a nice building and probably serves a great purpose? Yes, but it's not house scale. Another way to look at this is in another community that will remain nameless on the left. You can see that 2 houses were glued together as a duplex twin that's called in some parts of the country. And it's nice, it's brand new, it serves a need, but look how busy it is. And it's actually a little wider, not much, but it looks way busier and bigger than an actual side-by-side duplex on the right. And why is that? Because of the massing. So another thing that is overlooked, house scale massing. How do you achieve that? The simplest way is to put it all under 1 roof. Look at the building on the right has 1 roof spanning the whole building. The building on the left has these little peaks and valleys. And maybe that architect and that developer wanted to do that. That's great for multifamily apartment buildings. But when you're trying to fit buildings into house neighborhoods that have people worrying about, is this thing going to blow me away by the scale and the busyness of it? The thing on the left is definitely going to blow it away. The thing on the right is going to fit in with other houses. And here's one final one of my favorites. If you think that's a fire station on the left, it's not. It's actually a house. It's a duplex. It's a duplex twin. Again, these are 2 houses glued together in the middle. They're separated, and great. Somebody gets a semi-detached unit, and it's wonderful, but it's not house scale, right? Look at the one on the right, another duplex. And you could find versions of these that are 4 and 6plexes too, under the same kind of approach with this massing of 1 roof spanning the building. Today, I was riding in a taxi down to downtown in Washington, D.C. here, and I got to go down 16th. It was awesome to see all of these ones on the right. It was full of them, even better than that. Better than if I was here with enough time and had all those, I could have put those pictures in here. They would have been way better. But just go down 16th and you'll see all these great examples of what I'm talking about. So the second category is building height. And this is another one where we see the right intentions, but the numbers just aren't there. So what heights are necessary for this? The typical single-family zones or the zones that allow duplexes allow up to 35 feet. And that's a number that has a long history of why it's 35 feet. It doesn't need to be 35 feet, but it is. If you could read the numbers here, I'm sorry, but on the very top, I summarized it. We analyze, whenever you write standards, you want to analyze what you want to come out of the standards. If it doesn't exist in your community, go find where it is. and say, we're going to measure this because we want to make sure that we take into account everything that we need to when we write the standards, as opposed to what happens in a lot of processes. People say, I don't know, Paul, I feel better about 16. I know you feel better about 14. Let's find a number in the middle. That's what happens, right? You've been at meetings late in the night, and that's what ends up happening. And people get tired, and they say, 15 it is. Well, is 15 right? Maybe 16 wasn't right either, but is 15 right? And so you have to go measure the kinds of outcomes that you want in order to intelligently write standards. It sounds basic and obvious, but it doesn't happen, either for budget purposes, time, whatever. And so you just want to take the time to do it. So these three examples show you, if you could see all the numbers in the bottom tables there, you could see the details. They show you that all of these buildings fit under 30, and right now, 30 feet is your max in the zones that I saw, the R60 and the R90. I mean, the R40, R60, R90. And you can see that one is 25 feet overall, another one is 25 feet overall, and another one is 29. But right now, your ordinance, what I could see, it measures to this midpoint in the roof, which is an interesting technique. It's actually a good technique. However, I don't know if people have thought about this. So there's that 30 feet, and it's measuring to the midpoint of the top of the building. So that's a nuance, right? An applicant will tell you, hey, that's to the midpoint of the top roof on the building, but that's not the intent, right? The intent is that I could see there was a little diagram in the bottom of those fact sheets, and the diagram showed 2 stories clearly and a roof, but nowhere on the fact sheet did it say 2 stories, simply just in the diagram. So the argument is there to be made. Hey, does it really mean 2 stories, or is it just a diagram and we can use the 30 feet any way we can creatively use it? So it's an open door. I'm not criticizing your standard. I'm actually encouraging you to answer that question in the affirmative. And so if cities don't have that clarity, what happens is people add a 3rd story where only 2 stories really work or fit into the neighborhood. And so what they'll call that, the picture on the right, they'll call that extra space. Let's see, can I point here? Does it work? No, it doesn't. So you see how the gable roof coming by the chimney goes up and goes down, that white fascia board, you see that? That upside down V? So that's the top of the building, right? So then what they did is they said, well, we're adding a dormer. But that dormer is essentially a 3rd story. So if you don't have a rule that talks about where to measure the building, you can get 3-story buildings where you told everybody, well-intentioned, that you were going to build 2. So this is another thing we see gone awry in cities' codes. So what we recommend is have at least one measurement for sure, C here, which is to the highest eave. So in that case, using this photo again, it would have measured to the top of the 2nd story, where you see that roof come down, you see the roof gutter. That's where it would have measured to. And then above that, you can have, if you want to regulate overall, you can. And sometimes, you know, we can convince cities and communities to say, look, nobody's going to build more roof than they can afford, because why would they? You know, people are always afraid of this 60-foot tall roof on a 2-story house. Nobody's going to do that. It's just a waste of money, right? But if you had to, you could say, hey, in this case, 21 to 24 to the highest eave, and then 30 feet overall, if you had to measure the overall. The 21 to 24 gives you a good distance if you wanted to raise the ground floor off the ground a couple feet, and it gives you 10-foot plate heights to have 9-foot ceilings, or even 11-foot plate heights to have 10-foot ceilings. So those are the kinds of things you want to think about, especially if, like, this is not a one-size-fits-all. For example, you might have a neighborhood where they have historically taller ceilings, taller floors, you know, floor to floor. They're just taller, but they're not over 35 feet. And so that measurement wants to recognize that. But in other areas, it might be different. Maybe you don't want to have that nuance, but it's something to consider. I was asked to get into the weeds. So if you say, this guy's getting into the weeds, this was the intention. Yeah. So height transitions, and you can see here I have a little fun there with a 4-story building next to a 2-story house scale building. There it is again. The one on the left is a block scale building. The one on the right is a house scale. If you walk away with anything tonight, I hope it's that. So this is one of my favorites. Okay, let's say that the building on the left, you were able to convince the developer to come down and make it 2 stories. Hey, you know, our middle housing is 2 stories tall, that's it. Let's say they did that. The other big concern is that this thing's over 100 feet long. I can't even show you the end of it on this picture. It keeps going for about another 15 feet. Why is that a problem? Because in an area of houses that have backyards, assuming they have backyards, and they're detached from each other, there's an expectation that when you go in your backyard, you're not looking at a cruise ship going by your house, right? There's an expectation that you are in your backyard looking at another backyard or maybe the edge of the house, right? That's the expectation in neighborhoods, right, that have detached buildings. So building length is as important as building height. And right here on the right, I give a couple of typical dimensions. Again, you want to look at what they are in the neighborhoods where you're working. For example, on 16th, I saw plenty of blocks that the buildings weren't 40 feet wide. They were actually more like 30, 25. They were actually small footprint, pretty small little buildings. I'm just giving you a generalization that houses tend to be between 40 and 60 feet wide and then deep. And I really want you to consider that depth and the width as a factor in your zoning standards. And you can do it through FAR, but I'm sure you've had sessions on FAR that's just totally unpredictable, right? Here's another thing that cities try to do. They say, well, you know, we'll do upper story step backs or daylight planes. Number one, that decreases housing yield big time. It takes away floor area that can be sold and used for living, and it doesn't really do that much. It makes people feel good because, you know, mayors and council members can get up and say, we did the daylight plane and we did the step back and you know, you should be happy. But I don't think these people are too happy being neighbors to this thing. You know, again, the building on the left is new, has modern units, all the conveniences. That's not the topic. The topic is fitting in to neighborhoods with houses that are 1 and 2 stories tall. So this is one where I understand this is an issue here in Montgomery County, the distance from units to the street. And my understanding is that the front door of units needs to be within 50 feet of the street for fire access. I'm not here to criticize the fire department. My brother-in-law is a deputy fire chief in the city of Santa Monica in California. I am partial to fire departments. I understand what they have to deal with. I'm simply pointing out the one-size-fits-all of that rule. So if you look on the left, that's what that rule was intended to service. That parcel is over 500 feet deep. So yeah, the fire truck has to drive on that site, pull the hoses, and service the buildings. And so there's a logic to, hey, we don't want to pull the hoses all over the place because what if we have to move the truck again? But then you look at an existing neighborhood on the right, and you could see I put an arrow for the depth of the lot there, and that arrow represents, in this neighborhood, 100 feet to 150 feet deep. Typically, fire trucks stop in the street somewhere where they can safely position themselves, and they'll tell you they'll pull the hose off the truck about that distance, 150. It happens to be about the depth of a lot or half a block. They will do that. So that rule about 50 feet, what I did is, you see the little red square? I can't walk over there, but you see the arrow? There's a little red square I put there. That represents the area in the lot that is within 50 feet, and you can see the building goes beyond it. That building is a fourplex, and it goes beyond it. So in this case, the 3 units behind that red square, they can't happen. And clearly, they're there. And clearly, the fire truck could pull up in front and service that lot. So again, I don't want to start, no pun intended, a firestorm about that, but simply calling attention to that, to how that's a one-size-fits-all rule that was really intended for the thing on the left. Yeah, here it is. I'm sorry. I actually have a detail of it. You can see it. So you can see how far that the 50 feet rule really puts the rest of that building sort of out of commission. Lot coverage. This is another one where, again, policies say the right thing. The mayor knows what to say. The council's all supportive and the staff's supportive, but the lot coverage is still too high. And so people don't get that house scale building with a backyard. They get these bigger buildings. And so the two approaches, I'm summarizing all this, but the approach in most cities is on the left. So you see the building can be as long as the setbacks allow it to be and the lot coverage allow it to be. And often you get buildings that do this. And it takes a really good architect to design buildings that get bigger. The bigger the building, the easier it is to mess it up visually. I'm just telling you. The smaller buildings are easier and more forgiving. So the approach on the right is what we advocate in our work, and that's the building footprint approach, where you can see it's articulated in two pieces. There's the main body, which is 2 stories, and then if you want to grow the footprint, don't do it through lot coverage. You do it through these things that are centuries old called wings. You see bigger buildings have them, you see little buildings have them. And it was a way to just grow the footprint without being a bad neighbor. They knew what they were doing. They were designed well. And so we put this in all of our standards for these house scale buildings. And you could see, if you just look at the diagrams that show it in plan view, those gray boxes there at the middle of the slide, the middle one shows more. And some of you might be saying, well, I'm losing. No, the diagram on the left simply shows where the building can go. It doesn't promise you that you get all that. It just tells you all the places it can cover. And so you might have that really long building as a neighbor, and you're sitting in your backyard barbecuing, hanging out, and you're looking at the neighbors looking down in your backyard. So that's a huge reason why you want to make sure buildings are the right size. Another thing to point out here is that a technique we use on the wings is that in some neighborhoods, let's say that they're really high market neighborhoods where you got to build all the square feet that you can actually achieve, you probably need to let that wing be 2 stories tall. But in some other areas where those backyards are really prized and it's going to be hard enough to have any change, you want those wings to be 1 story so that the main body of the house is 2 and it steps down to 1. And there are other things you could do too. You could do offsets, all kinds of things to make it a better neighbor, but you still allow the footprint to grow. And then here are a couple just quick examples. These are analyses that we've done for cities across the country to demonstrate on their parcels the lot coverage that a small scale attainable house scale building would actually be. And you can see they're anywhere from like the low 20s to low 30s in terms of lot coverage. And most cities allow 40-45% lot coverage in neighborhood context, which is way too much. In yours, you allow between 30 and 35, near as I could tell. So the short story is missing middle housing doesn't need any more lot coverage. It actually can work within the limits that you already have. This is, got a couple more here. This is one of my favorites. So the picture on the left shows a typical multifamily project, and you see the 2 sets of driveways. They're 40 feet wide each. Each one has a 20-foot lane with a median so the fire truck can drive in and the trash truck can drive in and everybody else, right? It's understandable. Lots of units, their buildings way in the back, they got to get to them, right? But that same standard is applied to the buildings on the right if they were to be built today. But the buildings on the right were built 80 years ago, 90 years ago, when missing middle housing wasn't missing. It was actually what they did. So those are 4plexes and 5plexes that you can see there where, I don't know if you could see it, but the numbers, I measured those driveways, they're between 8 and 9 feet. And so you want to make sure that the driveway standards aren't applied just generically, just like that 50-foot separation from the street. This kills a lot of projects. I can't tell you how many cities that we talk to that do all this stuff, And then they say, Tony, you don't know our public works department. We can't talk to them. We're not going to be able to do that 9-foot driveway. How about 32? Well, I put it back to them. If you have a 60 or 70-foot lot and 25 or 30 feet of it is used by driveway, and then another 5 by planter, another 5 on this side to separate the driveway from the building, there's half your lot, over half your lot. So your building either goes back and you have a parking lot in front, which is another problem, or you're decreasing the footprint of the building, which is a bigger problem, right? So this is not about aesthetics. This is about housing yield. The more that you apply, let me take that back. The more that multifamily big project driveway standards are applied to small scale lots, the easier you will decrease housing yield. So parking location. You've seen townhouses like this where, again, those are nice townhouses, I'm sure, inside, but that streetscape is not something most people would want to walk on. Or if you're the neighbor on this side of the street looking at that, you go, wow, yeah, thanks a lot. So the building on the right is actually a building where the driveway comes in off the street. You see the plan diagram there? I show an arrow. This is not an alley. I understand you don't have alleys. This diagram is showing a driveway coming off the front street. You drive behind these buildings and park either underneath or in a surface lot behind. But in some cases, that isn't possible, either because of the lot depth, whatever. And so I just wanted to show that on the right, there are situations where you might need to allow the parking on the front, but the way to do it is to minimize the garages to be 1 car wide, and maybe they're tandem parking, 1 space behind the other. And that way you show more building and more entry and more active facade than parking garages and spaces. Lastly, this is the last slide here. The stormwater retention. I'm not an expert on the stormwater retention and certainly not on your standards, but I can tell you, again, like the fire rule, the separation from the street, this is in the same category. The situation on the left is what these rules are trying to deal with. These properties, that have these parking areas, okay, where does all that runoff go? Where does it go before it enters a sewer, all that, right? If you look at the bottom of that red diagram, that line, there's a little triangle back there that's a green space that's supposed to be a little open area that's also a stormwater retention area. I mean, would you go back there? Would you leave your building and go to the back of this parking lot and hang out when it's not full of water? Probably not, right? But it's done all the time because people need to meet the standard. The developer says, look, I don't think it's right either, but I got to get this project built. But on the right, here's a 120-year-old neighborhood that shows front yards, backyards. Not everybody has a green backyard, but they've got side yards and front yards and the parkway strip along the street. You have this here. That's happening as a network of lots as opposed to trying to do it on every parcel. And again, the big point here is don't take a rule that was intended for the thing on the left to solve its own problems on a big parcel and apply it to an individual parcel which can't do the same thing. But it can provide stormwater treatment through the front yard, sometimes through the backyard, and through the parkway strip. And I just threw these in for fun. This is the last slide. Sometimes the utilities can't be where you want them to be. You can't convince the utility to do it differently. So we've seen some solutions. The one I'm advocating is the one on the right. The one on the left is probably not that successful. It looks like a trash enclosure, but it's not. But the one on the right is sort of attractive. It goes with the building somewhat. And it's just a suggestion that maybe when we can't move the utilities to where we want them to be, there's something that can be done about them. So anyway, thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. And you're at least as funny as Jack, I think, for that one. All right, well, thank you very much. We've got a lot to think about. We've got a couple of questions. We're gonna start it off here, and then Paul is gonna wander around with a microphone if you have any questions in the thing. So just to kick us off real quick, As we discussed, and as I'm sure you guys know, we haven't introduced a ZTA yet. We have sent our recommendations and sort of our strategies to the county council. If you had one thing that you would recommend we put in, or one thing that you recommend we don't do, what is the most critical element you think should be in the ZTA when we send it back? As you know, as you said, Tony, getting into the weeds of it, what is a critical thing we have? And that's a question I think for everyone there. Oh, you, and I'll take you, and then I'll come down this one.
Okay. Well, I wish we didn't have to pick one thing. It's like a medical question, you know?
There's at least 7 of them, we know that
But
much.
if you had to pick one, I would say get combo, 2 stories and building footprint. Make sure that's right.
Yeah. Jack or Rosie, anything to add on to that? I'll get your thoughts on it.
I was going to say too, because, you know,
Please.
don't create the giant hairball, right? Make a process that is clear and is not subject to a lot of uncertainty.
Good, we covered everything on that question. All right, any questions out there to start with? Anybody have a hand? I've got a few I can ask. Yes, ma'am. Paul again?
What was the price of the Falls Church houses? I'm just curious.
They ended up being about $750,000,
Okay.
which is below the median house price in Falls Church.
No, I know.
Right,
My
I
friend
mean-
had to move out because she couldn't pay the taxes.
Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you.
Questions?
Yeah, thank you. I'll start with Tony. Thank you. Thank all of you for your presentations. I really love them, and it's, you know, it's really talking about boots on the ground, how it's actually done, or recommendations to how to do it or do it better. So you talked about the fire marshal, you know, making sure that, you know, maybe they change their rules about, you know, how deep they were willing to go, and also about the driveways. Did you ever? Did the building code have to change? Were you able to get the building code changed so you could have 9-foot or 10-foot wide driveways? Because that's also really important for ours to work, that we have narrower, you know, driveways. So, and then also, yeah. So, what did you have to change in the building code, and if you did, how long did it take to get that changed?
It wasn't the building code, it's the public works standards. It's the driveway standards and the driveway approach standards. You know, how big the curb cut can be or has to be on the street.
So you got them to change it, or?
Well, I have to tell you, that is one where, I don't know, out of 30, 40 codes, it's happened successfully maybe 6. It is a huge issue.
Right, right. And I also love how you really pushed home the house scale, you know, because we talk about that in our attainable housing strategies and the pattern book, house scale, but it's great how you gave so many examples for people to really visualize what is house scale and what's not house scale. And so I love that. And then also, Rosie, I loved how you talked about the why, you know, why we need it. And that's good. You gave good examples that you know, we are in a very, very high cost burden. You know, you talked about the West and the East Coast. We fit right in there. And while more people in our communities would be house burdened than in maybe in the Midwest, right? You know, so I really love that too. And then Jack, yeah, I love the cottage piece, you know, and how you were able to, you know, I like also how you call things like not just senior co-housing, but aging in community. And we're also in our, as we are messaging on attainable housing, we also have mentioned how people that want to still live in their communities can stay in their communities, but they need handicap accessible, or their houses, you know, they need to lower their expenses. So by building a duplex, selling one half, making that duplex, you know, handicap accessible, or you talk the livability kind of pieces that would work for many, many seniors or in our community. So thank you all for your presentations.
Can you talk a little bit about keeping the trees if you're in a very tree-filled community?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. You know, the easiest way to keep the trees is to have lower lot coverage and to have the building footprint standards. The second well, let's say that the lot coverage didn't change. The building footprint standards will make sure that the building doesn't get too big and that you can keep trees or plant new trees. Let's say that the tree's in the middle of the lot and there's nowhere else to put the house, right? By making that footprint smaller, you're going to have more areas to plant trees. That's the quickest way to do that. The other way, let's say there was resistance to put it on the lot, put trees on the parcel, is to require the trees be put into the park strip out in front of the sidewalk if they're missing. We often write standards that obligate the developer to, if they're missing based on a certain spacing, they have to put them in. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Hi, in full disclosure, I am a colleague of Rosie Hepner, so I'll ask my question with that caveat. It seems to me that in our work, one of the things that is missing is not only an understanding. I mean, when we get into the weeds of standards, people maybe go to sleep if they're not housers. I find it fascinating, but that we just don't have a lot of experience with the type of housing that we want to build. Yeah. And so we resist the notion of what we don't know. And so I'm thinking is like an opportunity for a documentary. I know like the cottages at Bond, which Rosie had in her slides, do a lot of, he lives there, the developer lives there, so he's okay with people walking into his house. And the product that you develop in Falls Church, that may not be the case, but it seems to me that when people are exposed to that type of housing, they realize that it's really not as bad as they think. If it's really massed properly, right? If it doesn't look like one of the examples that you gave, Tony, about, how it really looks like a ship on the side of your house, that's not going to be a successful tour. But is that something that will help? I mean, I don't know, when we think about Montgomery County, when thinking about more units, is it the experiential aspect of it could help, have this NIMBY like you describe? And I don't know if it has been done, if there's documentaries out there, is there something that the Terwilliger Center needs to be doing? But we're not documentarians, but do you have any experience of that? How do you see that wave of NIMBYism being attacked? And maybe that's one of the ways that you have experienced that.
I will say from a developer's point of view, there's certain reluctance because if you say, we're going to do it like this, well, somebody's going to hate that, right? So you have to be very careful about it. But I think when you have something as big as Montgomery County, you have housing examples that may be precursors, they may be 80 years old, but that you can document and say, well, you can drive by, you can look at it, and here's the mechanisms we're using. Tony made a point earlier to us when we were eating Fritos, was it's handy to work backwards from the result and say, this is what we're trying to achieve, what are the rules we have to put in place to achieve that? And so I think Montgomery County, you don't have to go into DC, but if you dare go into DC or come across to Virginia, you have regional examples that people can go see. If you said, McLean's famous for saying at one point in their planning area that they want to become Carmel. And one, it's kind of like Carmel, it's like California, it's, there's like huge trees and you can't wear high heels in the city, it's illegal, unless you have a permit. But it's not visual for somebody who can go look at it and walk it. Yeah. And so I would say local examples are better. Yeah.
And we do. We have one. So we'll have to dig it up, let's remember. But back during COVID, when we had one of ULI's big meetings we had to do fully virtually, we did a virtual tour of Beach Plum Village, which was one of the developments in Nantucket. Now that was only able to be built because the developer went to the state. Massachusetts has 40B, which allows them to override local opposition to get where they're not building affordable housing. So Nantucket wasn't meeting their affordable housing needs. This developer had a beautiful development. Really, I mean, just cottages that look like they belong in Nantucket. And honestly, I think there were not that many were actually for workforce. But just the concept of that was, just had a lot of NIMBYism. And it won one of our awards, and it's really beautiful, has great amenities. And then it went over the community, not one person who wrote me a very nasty email after the award was given out, but we did a beautiful virtual tour of it with interviews, as well as there was a actual documentary from Nantucket about the housing challenges, because it got so bad that there was actually a house fire because of overcrowding in homes by all these people who have no place to live on an island like Nantucket. But I have no idea where that's saved, so we will have to find it.
We actually have several great examples of multi-unit houses in Silver Spring. And we have more than a few. We have a lot of examples in Tacoma Park here in the county. And so we do have the examples already existing, which, people should go see. They're very easy to find. You just look for the doors.
One of them's a co-housing community in Tacoma Village.
Yeah. I wanted to ask one question. Oftentimes, what we're seeing in our investigation on attainable housing, the small scale, is that, the building codes start triggering a lot of changes once you go from a residential code to a commercial code. And maybe you have examples of different jurisdictions across the country. I believe here, if you go more than 2 units, you trigger commercial. Now, that has a big impact on the width of your driveway. That has a huge impact on the distance. A front door, a hinged door, can be from the street. It has a huge impact on costs, obviously, because you really have to reinforce things. Are there examples of either where that code is less stringent or allows residential for more than 2 units, for instance, maybe up to 4, even up to 8, whatever, so that you can extend the residential code, building codes, to help make this type of housing affordable and actually, you can realize it?
Go ahead.
So I sit on a couple of building code, I'm on 2 or 3 of them. The issue has become is that most of the codes are national codes. And so the building code component, if you're going to model on a national code, has a built-in bias. Local codes can override, et cetera. Maryland is very different than Virginia because Virginia is the Dominion, and it has the same rule as Massachusetts. Local jurisdictions only have the controls that the central jurisdiction gives them. So you have the ability to legislate and modify code, but it is a giant hairball, and it is something that you don't go lightly into, because you have, I would say the most important person in that building code world is the fire marshal. Because all building codes, and especially fire code, is written to say, notwithstanding anything in the code official can determine whether or not this is within the public weal and the benefit. So will people burn? And so they can override any code. So you really have to have something that's very holistic with your fire marshal and that component of the building code.
I wanted to add to that there are, it's slow, but it's starting. For example, the city of Memphis, Tennessee, and the state of Tennessee are working on that. And I think they are moving it up to 6 units. So just to be clear for people that, just to be clear, the current requirement is up to 2 units or 3-story townhouses can be built under the residential code, which is easier. Anything over that goes to the commercial code and requires all kinds of fire-rated doors and sprinklers and all these other things. So the state of Tennessee, I don't know the status of it right now, but as of, 6 months ago, last time we spoke to Memphis, because we were doing work there, the city had been working with the state, and it looked really good that something was going to happen at the state level. And I'm pretty sure Minnesota did something, and I know Oregon is working on it as well, and Washington State is probably not too far behind. Yeah, so it's happening. It just, like, you know, like you're saying, it's very local.
Thank you. This question's for Jack. You said that you do collaborative design, and I was wondering, do you do it together with communities, and did you try it in Falls Church?
Collaborative is a technique. Who's in the room is always important. So when we're doing this with private developers and groups, it's who are the decision makers, and, you know, in a household, it's make sure you have everybody. When you start to get into community groups, what we did in the Falls Church, what we did is we held focus groups for people who were interested in aging community. So we did it from what is the need, what would people want for these units who are going to actually live in them. The collaborative process, once it gets into a neighborhood level, is very much prescriptive by what the local jurisdiction requires. And I will tell you, as a developer, it is very difficult to want to do right, but not get swamped by somebody who has, or a small group that has a single core issue. And so there are just people who you cannot make happy in a collaborative process because they're not actually collaborating. I live in a consensus, or my intentional community works on consensus. Consensus does not mean 100% happy. It means I see what you're doing, I've heard my concerns, and I understand that this is either my personal concern or it's a handmaiden to the greater good of what's trying to be created. So I'm very much a believer in it, but as a developer hat, it's often a no-win situation if you pull the community in early, because inevitably you get something that you thought was community consensus, and then you go through the regulatory process, and all the people who said, well, I wasn't notified, I wasn't involved in the consensus, and they show up. So it's less likely to happen when it is going to go through a public process anyways. Yeah. Certainly for larger projects, yes, but we're talking about a small scale where it's me, Teresa, and Bob, you know, and we're trying to put it together, and, you know, the bank is saying, where's my money coming back? And so, you know, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. And keep in mind, a little bit like he was saying, it's a macro concept. The kind of processes or the type of codes that are trying to control a multi-block development are very different for somebody who's trying to take an acre and a half and put 10 little cottages on, right?
That's another question I wanted to ask you guys. I mean, Tony, you've done, again, these types of developments all over the country, in Virginia and so on. Who are the typical developers of this type of housing, this missing middle, small scale, attainable housing?
Yeah, sure, I can offer what we've been seeing. It's been the equivalent of like a single-family house builder, and I don't mean a merchant builder. I mean somebody who builds, you know, 4 houses a year, 6 houses a year. That scale of builder that says, oh, wow, you know, I'll do these duplexes, and they do duplexes first, and then they move into maybe a 4-plex. So that's what we're seeing, with the exception of a developer that we did a project for in Papillion, Nebraska, outside of Lincoln. I think it's like, I don't know, 80 acres and 600 units or so. And that developer was a former like big apartment developer. And he came to us and said, basically he said, I want to do a project that has all leasable space and all rentable. And at some point, maybe I could sell buildings off individually, like a 4-plex or a 6-plex. I could sell the units off someday, but I want to rent it for the foreseeable future. And I don't want any lobby space. I don't want any corridors. And that's why I'm coming to you about this middle housing. Yeah. That's why he came to us. And so it's been designed, I think it's about 60% complete. Yeah, and he's obviously not the single-family house builder. He's I would say, a small multifamily builder.
And part of that is, it's going to probably be somebody local.
Yeah.
It's going to be somebody who already knows the ground rules and the basics and feels like it may be a hoop of much movement, but they've been there and seen it and done it. So you're not talking about faceless corporations taking over the housing stock of America. This is, somebody you probably have in the neighborhood who knows that this is, and feels very strongly about it. I was telling the joke, Andres Dwani Pladger-Zyberg, a very famous planning group who did Kentlands, for instance. Years ago, he did a presentation here, and he said, developers. Well, we have a name. We used to have a name for people like that. It's like town fathers.
Yeah.
Right? And it's trying to put it in context. Demonizing the developer is not going to help get that wonderful city street that you could walk down. There were trees and these cute little houses and little narrow driveways and, those great places that we have in our community that everybody loves. Or you visit some place and you go, this is just a fabulous place to live. Those things taking on things that are old but new again.
Yeah. Anybody else? Any other questions out from the thing? Oh, go for it.
Part of the Terwilliger Center. So I always joke with my kids that our house, I tell them, I'm like, if you're going to stay in this house, it's because this is going to be a triplex. And your dad and I are going to live in one, and you're going to live in the other two. Or we were going to be able to rent them, and that's just the way it's going to be. Because of the cost of housing, right? If you live in Montgomery County and you have 2 kids, it's really hard for us to envision that I actually could own a home in our county. And so is this something that when you talk about who is developing, is there also an opportunity to think about owners of homes that can have ready-made plans? And I know that, people may not want that, but that obviously diminishes the cost, has a different access, and more people can actually get into the game of doing this. So there's also an education piece about it. And assuming that all of those hurdles have been kind of paved over a little bit, or there's help to be able to navigate that. But there is an opportunity for homeowners that want to create more units, not only selfishly like a mother like me, but also for me to be able to age in place, or for them to be able to have an opportunity to have that experience, right? And so is that something that is being considered? Because that's more of an education piece rather than just, that is, a homeowner will have to deal with his neighbors in the NIMBYs, right? In a very different way. And they may be in our neighborhood for a very long time, and they may have kids. So that may change the conversation. So I don't know if there's any thought process about, helping that access.
I'm not sure if there's a policy in place yet that we're considering, but Tony, I know you probably have dealt before with pre-approved type buildings and house plans that some jurisdictions might have. Maybe you could speak a little bit about that.
Yeah, across the country, you're seeing cities and counties starting to do that for all the reasons you just stated, that just to make it happen that much easier, especially in California, where I'm from. Housing is under a lot of pressure to be produced, under so much pressure that the state will actually litigate in court against the jurisdiction if they don't meet their quotas. So it's pretty intense. So our office produced, I wish I could tell you I worked on it, I didn't, but our office produced this neighborhood kit. And if you go online, go onto opticosdesign.com, and you'll see there's a tab for a webpage for all these pre-approved plans. And so we worked on, I don't know, there are duplexes up to, I think, 6 plexes, maybe an 8-plex. And we worked with an architect of record who will actually, like in certain cities, get that plan set approved. So we prepared the plans, prepare options, you can select, and then our architect of record in different places says, okay, I'll take it from there and just finish it and get it approved. So I don't think there's anything, except for maybe accessory dwelling units, ADUs. Those are really off the shelf, and you could just go to the permit counter. But for houses and fourplexes and things like that, I don't think there's something quite, here, I pulled it off the internet, can you approve it? There's another step in there, but essentially it takes a lot of the work out. So that does exist, and they're just, if you just go in and type model house plans, you're gonna find them all over the place. It's really becoming a big thing.
Can I just say that?
From a developer point of view, if a jurisdiction said, forget the building code, because that's a whole different animal, but from a zoning code perspective, to say, oh, this is a house scale product that would fit on
Yeah.
you know, this, that, and the other, and you could expedite or make that essentially by right development, because it's like, these are the pictures we sold the county on, that this is what would get built, and you had set plans for it.
Yeah.
All day long, right? Because I've cut my uncertainty in half. Building code is onerous and this and the other, but they don't change their rules very often or very fast. So that's solvable within a finite math problem, if you will. The zoning is what gets it to be uncertain and delays. So if that was, everybody loves this, like we have in Tacoma Park or this section over here, and it's applicable to this neighborhood. From a developer point of view, let alone a local homeowner, that's a home run.
Yeah, I just want to say just quickly, that's a great question you had. And when the board was putting together its recommendations, one of the things was what can we do to make it easier for homeowners to do this? And so I would think once something comes down the pike, I think having some, maybe it's not necessarily pre-approved plans, but some ideas of how this could work, I think it would be very, very helpful to residents, because, right, some of the opposition that I see in the market is that people can't see themselves in it yet, right? Yet. But we want to get it so that people, existing homeowners, can see themselves in this. So it's a great question, and I would foresee that there will be some general plans that people can, over time, that, you know, you could see yourself in it and make it easier for you to move forward. Yes.
Question over here, Paul.
So I was getting kind of excited listening to, especially Tony explain, you know, it's an empty parcel is different from like a residential neighborhood where all the houses are, you know, you're talking about the next door neighbor or something, about how it, like, when you're designing these things, they shouldn't be a one-size-fits-all. So if these pre-planned, you know, every neighborhood has its own little character, right? So these pre-planned things, they just, like, how does that fit into what you were saying about, you know, like, considering the circumstances?
Yeah, great question. Thank you for that. So the pre-approved plans, at least that we offer, and I think this is true for a lot of the ones that are offered out there, so I don't want to say it's just us. There are variations, not just in the way they look, but in the footprint. So let's say there's a side-by-side duplex that is for narrow parcels. There's a side-by-side duplex for wider parcels, and when I mean wide, like 60 or 70, or you know, and narrow meaning under 50. That for sure. And then there's the other way, like the main body that I talked about in the wings. The wings are something that you can add on or not. So not everybody's going to do the same thing or put the wing in the same location. So you're going to get variety just like that. So it's a kit of parts. And for example, like the options for the entry, there might be one that's just a shed over door. There might be one that's more of a pediment. There are little things like that that can work that don't break the bank for the person building it, and they're relatively similar in terms of cost, you know? I see. Yeah, well, that's something that the locality would have to go through and say, is this something we need to concern ourselves with? And if it is, where are we concerned about it? And it would probably be geographic, you know?
One of the things, and not to jump on the panelists here, but one of the things we've talked about with the attainable housing strategies is having a pattern book style thing available for people to look at and say, this is what will fit on these types of lots, and this is the kind of thing that we mean when we say neighborhood scale. And if you're in, I'll say Tacoma Park, pick one at random, you know, they often look like X, right? Their entryway has the pit, you know, it could be a shed or anything, yeah. We absolutely intend to. If you went into my neighborhood, it would be one plan and you would just turn it around and one side faces the street, and then the other side faces the street. It's very simple.
So one of the things to keep in mind about the 3 good idea rule, right, is are you actually in an historic district where you're going to control the look of the homes versus allowing for an eclectic blend of homes, right? And why can't I have a contemporary home? So I would say be very careful about laminating another good idea, saying we want architectural control down to the shape of the doorway or the dormer entry. You know, I want a covered entry. You know, it needs to be this scale, but it could be very contemporary. It could be this and the other. So I would caution you to be open that the goal here is to give people a range of home sizes and affordability or attainability that they don't have right now. For instance, as simple as, do you have first floor masters? Do you have that many first floor masters in Montgomery County? I'm gonna guess no. Most houses built from the 80s on have maximum footprint, first floor, 2-story foyer entry, and all the bedrooms are upstairs. And that doesn't suit the over 65 crowd. I mean, yes, I can run up the stairs right now, you know, carrying a small child, but, you know, give me 10 years, probably not. So what are you trying to achieve? You know, what is the primary goal? And be careful about how many things you laminate into it. You know, you want to save a specimen tree. Can you save every tree? No, but if you have a specimen tree, are you willing to bend the rules on setbacks to keep that specimen tree? You know, be very careful how many things you start laminating in. That's sort of my harping on.
And Rosie had a
Yeah, and I would say we did a project in Austin, and it's so much easier to tear down and rebuild a McMansion on lots in Austin than it was in the case that, you know, a lot of the people we were working with were seniors. And just make the necessary changes so that their homes were more accessible and so that they could age in place, or just make the necessary upgrades for the quality of the housing. And so a lot of that was an education piece and just changing, you know, little things to make it easier for that, which are the homes that people, you know, think of when they think of East Austin, which is where we were, and had the more, you know, cultural, you know, just fit into the neighborhood character versus what they were associating with gentrification and displacement and these really big homes, you know, bought and constructed by, you know, Tesla workers. But, you know, in the end, they were encouraging that because I can't remember now, maybe Fabiola does, remembers the cost to tear down. It was like $50 or something. It was just, it's just insane, you know? So of course, it's easier to tear down and rebuild than it would be to do anything else. So like you were just saying, you know, don't let those little things become, you know, prohibitive. Just for this cultural, or for the neighborhood character or historic elements, because, you know, in the end, you might lose a lot of your longtime residents.
Yeah. And go, please.
Yeah, just that before I lose it, somebody reminded me, one of the questions reminded me to say this. As you go through the process of this zone test amendment, whatever process you go through, I really encourage you to use the phrase either right-sizing the standards or customizing the standards to today's needs. It doesn't mean straitjacketing, it means looking at them and making revisions as necessary, as opposed to the well-intended phrases like relaxing or other terms which are well-intended, you know, nothing wrong is meant by that, but an opponent looks at relaxing and says, whoa, what is somebody getting away with, right? Immediately. But if you say, no, we're just taking a fresh look at standards, and maybe not all of them, maybe you don't have to change everything to Jack's point, but it's about just getting the standards to do what it is the community wants. I pose this question a lot. I think the person talking to before the meeting tonight, I said I ask this question all the time about standards and about policies, and ask you, are your standards and policies serving you, or are you serving them? And what I usually hear in talking to people in communities, it's the latter. People say, wow, I didn't think about it, but we're serving the system we have instead of the system we have serving our needs and what we want, so.
All right. Maybe time for one last, possibly very short question. No takers on being the last short. There we go. All right. No other questions we have are short. They would all be very long and very detailed. Well, thank you. We did ask you to get into the weeds, in fairness. That was on us. But yes, thank you. Could we please give them a big round of applause to our panelists here. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. We really appreciate it. Everyone that's been online and watching, thank you all as well. We appreciate this. Ends our speaker series for this year. We'll be back soon, though, after in the new year for 2025. We'll have some very exciting things coming. Thank you, everyone. We appreciate it.